There were two women in my life, one who gave me existence, and the other for whom I changed my entire existence. My mother, Celia, wasn't the type of woman to complain. She belonged to a generation that swallowed pain so that the walls of the home remained standing. When my father passed away 15 years ago, she worked 2 shifts in the scorching fields of Kansas just so I could finish my business degree. She even sold her small pension fund, the only safety net for her old age. She never told me. She just said, "Everett, you just move forward. I'm fine." My wife, Margot, knew all of this. Or at least, I thought she did. We had been married for 12 years, and I had worked myself to the bone to give her the life she dreamed of. A magnificent villa, a brand new Porsche, and a prominent name in the city's highest social circles. But as her bank balance grew, her heart shrank. She no longer saw Celia as a mother, but as a burden. An obstacle that lowered her status in front of her new, shiny friends. 4:15, 8:30. On that Wednesday morning, the frost-bitten January air was rattling the windows. I was leaving for a business trip to Chicago. I saw Margot in the kitchen, dressed in her expensive designer clothes, talking to someone on the phone about a charity gala. My mother sat quietly in the corner, sipping her tea, her hands trembling slightly, a legacy of the hard labor she had done for me. "Margot," I said as I said goodbye, "Mom's blood pressure medication is running out. Can you pick it up from the pharmacy on your way back?" Margot shrugged without looking away from her phone. "I have lunch with Julian, Everett. Why can't she go herself? She has a walker." I looked at my mother. Her eyes were downcast. "Margot, it's snowing outside," I said in a low voice. "Then figure it out," she said dismissively, and walked out of the room. At that time, it felt like a typical marital bicker. I didn't know it was merely the first drop of a massive storm. I kissed my mother's forehead, wrote my phone number on a piece of paper, and told her to call me immediately if there was any problem. "I'm fine, Everett," she said with that same old smile. "You just focus on your meeting." I got into the car, but when I looked back, Margot was watching me from the window. The look on her face wasn't that of a wife saying goodbye. She was waiting for something. She was waiting for me to leave. I was in Chicago, but my heart was elsewhere. Even during meetings, I couldn't shake the image of my mother's bowed head. I called her at 6:00 p.m., but she didn't answer. Then I called Margot. She didn't pick up either. I assumed they were at an upscale restaurant, but a strange unease was growing inside me. I cut my meetings short, caught the last flight back, and landed at the airport at 10:42 p.m. I had planned to surprise Margot, but fate had a different surprise waiting for me. When my taxi pulled up to our gate, I saw the entire house was lit up. Expensive luxury cars lined the driveway. Margot had mentioned a small meeting, but this was a full-blown party, the high society friends she viewed as her ticket to a new life. I decided to enter through the side door quietly, wanting to see what the house felt like in my absence. The first scene I saw upon entering through the kitchen froze my blood. The kitchen was stifling, piled with stacks of dishes, and there was my 75-year-old mother, Celia, on her hands and knees on the floor. She had a soapy rag in her hand, scrubbing a red wine stain out of the tile. She was gasping for air, her face drenched in sweat. At that moment, Margot walked into the kitchen. She lifted her silk gown slightly to avoid the dirty floor and nudged my mother's shoulder with her foot. "Hurry up, Celia. The guests need dessert now, and you're being lazy. If you want to live here for free, you need to earn your keep." My mother said in a trembling voice, "Margot, my back hurts so much. Can I just sit down for a moment?" Margot let out a sharp, venomous laugh. Sit? I told Julian and her husband that you're our new housekeeper. If they see you sitting here, what will happen to my reputation? Go, clean those dirty dishes, and then bring coffee to the hall for everyone. And remember, address me as ma'am. 1840-2410. I stood in the shadows, watching it all. My impulse was to storm out and drag Margot by her hair out of the house. But I turned my anger into cold ice. I pulled out my phone and silently started recording. I watched as my mother, the woman who had never bowed to anyone, walked with heavy steps toward the hall, carrying a tray of coffee. I followed her to the doorway. Margot was sitting there with 4 of her friends, including the city's famous real estate tycoon, Adrian. "Oh, look, our new help brought the coffee," Margot said mockingly. Julian looked at my mother and turned up her nose. "Margot, she's so old. Can she even do the job properly?" Margot took a sip of the coffee and spat it onto the floor. "Not at all. Look, the coffee is cold. Celia, you can't do one thing right. Go back and make it again. And, on your way, clean my shoe. There's a bit of dust on it." My mother stood there, shaking. Laughter echoed through the hall. Margot looked at my mother and uttered the sentence that brought the last brick of my 12-year marriage crashing down. Poor thing, her own son left her here because he got tired of her. She should be grateful I'm at least giving her a roof. I stopped the recording, tucked my phone into my pocket, and stepped out of the darkness into the light. A sudden silence hit the hall, as if everyone's tongues had been cut. Margot's face turned as white as ash. The coffee cup slipped from Margot's hand, shattering on the rug, but she didn't care about the stain. Her eyes were locked onto mine, where she didn't see the Everett she knew how to control. In the hall, her high-class friends were glancing at each other uncomfortably. Adrian, the tycoon, stood up, adjusting his jacket. "Margot, I think we should go," he muttered. "Stay put, Adrian." My voice was so cold, the room felt like it turned to ice. "The party is just getting started." I walked over to my mother, who was still standing there, trembling. I took the tray from her hands, set it on the table, and took her hand in mine. It was as cold as ice. "Mom, go pack your bag," I said softly. "Everett, listen." Margot tried to step forward, her face now wearing that fake remorse that caught criminals often put on. "This isn't what it looks like. We were just joking, right, Celia?" She looked at my mother, her eyes pleading for a lie. My mother said nothing, she just squeezed my hand. I looked at Margot and said only one sentence: "Your time is up." I took my mother to her room, settled her down, and grabbed my car keys. "Mom, we're leaving this place." "But Everett, you're home," she whispered. "This house is just walls now, Mom," I replied. "Your peace is worth more than this." I moved her to a suite in the best hotel in the city and instructed security not to let Margot or anyone associated with her inside. As soon as I left the hotel, I called my oldest friend, Silas. Silas wasn't just a friend, he was the most expensive and ruthless divorce attorney in the state. "Silas, I need your help," I said. "It's 1 a.m., Everett. Is everything okay?" he asked. "Nothing is okay," I replied, "but by tomorrow morning, everything will be in my favor. I'm sending you an audio and a video file. Watch them and tell me how painful we can make this for her." For the next 4 hours, Silas and I sat in a private office, arranging everything I had prepared years ago. There was one thing Margot didn't know. The villa she was living in was never legally in my name or hers. My father had placed that villa under a trust for his wife, my mother, and I was merely the trustee. Over the past 3 years, Margot had taken hundreds of thousands of dollars from our joint accounts to fund her fictional businesses, which were actually just paying for her lavish parties. Silas smiled as he handed me a file. "Everett, she didn't just insult your mother, She committed financial fraud. We can not only divorce her, but we can stop her from taking anything out of that house except a single pair of clothes. I looked at the clock. It was 6:15 a.m. Silas, I said, I want her to be served at lunch today while she's with her friends. I want her to feel the exact same humiliation my mother felt last night in front of those people. I rewatched the video on my phone where Margot told my mother to clean her shoe. My heart was breaking, but my mind was perfectly clear. Margot had said my mother needed to earn her place. Now Margot was about to learn how to earn a life on the street. Thursday afternoon at the Lumiere, the city's most expensive restaurant, was in full swing. Margot sat across from Julian and Adrian, radiating her usual forced elegance. She was wearing a white designer suit, a desperate attempt to signal to the world that she was unfazed by the previous night. She was laughing as she scanned the menu, pitching Adrian on her new investment, which was really just my money in another wrapper. Suddenly, the restaurant doors swung open. Silas walked in, clad in a sharp black suit and carrying a leather briefcase. He walked straight to their table with a predator's focus. Margot saw him, and her smile died. Silas wasn't just my lawyer. To Margot, he was a harbinger of doom. "Mrs. Watson," Silas said loudly, his voice carrying to the surrounding tables. "Apologies, but you have exactly 5 minutes to sign a very important legal document." 43:30:48:15. Margot glanced around, panicked. "Silas? What are you doing here? Where is Everett?" she hissed, trying to maintain her dignity in front of her friends. Silas smiled and slid a file across the white tablecloth. "Everett is at your house, Margot. Or rather, his mother's house. These are divorce papers, and attached is an immediate eviction notice. You have 2 hours to vacate the premises." The table went silent. Julian gasped, "Divorce? But Margot, you said Everett couldn't breathe without you." Margot's face flushed a deep, angry red. "How dare you? Everett can't do this. That house is a marital asset." Silas pulled out another sheet. "Actually, no, Margot. The property is owned by the Celia Watson Trust. You were merely a guest whose invitation has been revoked. And by the way, all your credit cards have been frozen since they were linked to my client's business account." Margot frantically grabbed her handbag and threw a card at the waiter to pay the lunch bill, but the waiter returned moments later. "I'm sorry, ma'am, this card has been declined. 48:15:53:40. The final blow came when Silas pulled out his iPad and pressed play on the video I had recorded. The audio was crystal clear, Margot ordering my mother to scrub her shoe. "Adrian," Silas said, looking at the tycoon, "my client was going to release this to the press, but he thought you should see it first, since you were about to become Margot's charity partner. Would you really want to be associated with a woman who treats the elderly like this?" Adrian stood up, his face twisted in disgust. "Absolutely not. Margot, I never expected this from you." He and Julian walked out without another word, leaving Margot alone with the lunch bill and the wreckage of her social life. When I arrived at the house, Margot was already there, screaming at the locked doors. "You can't do this, Everett. I'm your wife." I looked at her. The designer suit was ruined by sweat and streaks of mascara. "You were my wife, Margot," I said calmly, "but you insulted the woman who gave me everything. You said she had to earn her place. Now, go out there and show me how you earn yours." Security placed her suitcase on the lawn, the same lawn where she had humiliated my mother. I gave her one last look and closed the door. I turned around to find my mother standing at the top of the stairs. There was no vengeful joy on her face, only peace. "Everett," she said softly, "can we finally have that tea in silence?" I took her hand and we walked toward the kitchen. There were no dirty dishes, no stained floors, and most importantly, no cruelty left in our home. But the silence didn't last long. A faint, desperate knocking started at the back door. It wasn't the aggressive pounding of the woman who had left an hour ago. It was the sound of someone who had finally hit rock bottom. I opened the door to find Margot collapsed on the porch, drenched by a sudden downpour. Her designer suit was ruined, but for the first time her eyes looked clear of the vanity that had blinded her. "Everett," she choked out, her voice barely a whisper. "I saw the look on your mother's face when I left. It wasn't hate. It was pity. And that hurt more than any lawyer's letter. I have been a monster." She looked past me to where my mother was standing. Margot crawled toward her, oblivious to the mud she was tracking in. "Mama Celia, I don't deserve this roof, but please, I am so sorry. I lost my way in the greed. Please let me earn my place as your daughter, not your boss." I looked at my mother. She had every right to turn her away, but she simply walked over and placed a warm hand on Margot's trembling shoulder. "A house is only as strong as its foundation, Margot," my mother said softly. "And our foundation is family. Go get cleaned up." I realized then that my mother's strength wasn't just in her endurance, but in her capacity to forgive. I looked at Margot and nodded, a silent promise that we would try to rebuild, one brick at a time. 1 month later, the villa was once again filled with people, but the atmosphere had transformed. Adrian and Julian were back, invited by my mother herself, but this time they weren't here to be served. I walked into the grand dining room and stopped. My mother was sitting at the head of the table, dressed in a stunning emerald gown, sharing stories of her life in Kansas. Adrian was listening with genuine fascination, leaning in as she spoke, and right beside her was Margot. She wasn't barking orders or trying to impress anyone with my bank account. Margot was laughing, her hand resting affectionately on my mother's arm. When the dessert came, Margot didn't ring a bell for a maid. She stood up, walked to the kitchen, and brought out the trays herself. As she passed my mother, she leaned down and kissed her cheek. "Everything is perfect, Mom," she whispered. I watched as my wife, the woman who had almost lost her soul, now looked at my mother with nothing but reverence and love. The guests weren't just impressed by the food, they were moved by the respect in the room. I walked over, took my place at the table, and squeezed Margot's hand. She squeezed back, her eyes filled with a peace I hadn't seen in years. We had learned the hardest lesson of all, that while revenge is sweet, forgiveness is what truly makes a home. The tea was finally served, and for the first time, it tasted like happiness.